street, every shortcut in the snow. I retired early, not because I had to, but because I'd earned it. After 37 years of parent-teacher meetings, substitute shortages, broken heaters, scraped knees, and more cafeteria fights than I care to count, I thought retirement would feel like stepping off a treadmill. Slower mornings, long walks with my dog Harold, reading books in peace, and for a while it was just that. Until the day I got the call that my only son David had been killed in a car accident on a rainy highway outside Boston. He was 35. I remember sitting on the floor of the hallway, phone still in my hand, unable to move. The officer's voice on the line had already gone silent. It felt like the world had been sliced open and I had fallen into something that wasn't real. David was my whole world, my only child. His father, my late husband, had passed when David was just 6. So it had always been the two of us, just us. And now suddenly it was just me. At the time, his wife, Lila, was 32. They'd been married for 5 years. No children. I never had a particularly warm relationship with her. Not cold, just distant. Lila was sharp, well-dressed, always had her phone in her hand. She smiled when she had to, and never more than that. Still, David loved her, and that was enough for me. She came to stay with me for a few days after the funeral, just until she figured things out. I made up the guest room, cooked her meals, gave her space to cry, but she didn't cry much. In fact, I was surprised at how composed she was, how quickly she returned to checking her emails, posting photos of David online, answering sympathy calls like she was managing a media event. I chalked it up to shock. We all grieve differently, but those few days turned into weeks. She said her lease had ended, and her job had offered remote work, and if I didn't mind, she could stay until she found her footing. Of course I didn't mind. She was all I had left of David, and maybe I needed someone too. So I let her in. I gave her the master bedroom because it had the nicer windows. I cleared out the walk-in closet. I adjusted the thermostat because she said the house felt drafty. I started cooking dinners again, not just for myself anymore. And in those early weeks there were moments that felt like family. Her helping me carry groceries, lighting candles in the living room, making tea after dinner. Grief can bond people, I told myself. It was nice, at first, even comforting. But slowly, something in me began to notice small changes. At first they were easy to ignore. My favorite throw blanket missing from the couch. A strange package arriving that I hadn't ordered. An Amazon Alexa installed in the kitchen for convenience, even though I'd never used one in my life. And the bills, my God, the bills began climbing. Lila liked long hot showers, and ordering dinner instead of cooking it. Still, I said nothing. I told myself it was temporary, that I should be grateful for the company. Then one afternoon in February, I slipped on the back steps and landed hard on my side. The x-rays showed a fractured vertebra, nothing requiring a hospital stay, but the doctors strongly recommended a spinal fusion surgery within the year. Recovery would be long, they said. Painful. I would need help. Lila was by my side when they told me. She held my hand and gave me that same tight, unreadable smile she always gave. "Don't worry," she said. "I'll take care of you. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me." Those words, "it's the least I can do," they echoed in my head that night. As I sat alone in my room, pain meds wearing off, staring at the ceiling fan, I wanted to believe her. I did believe her. Because despite the little red flags I had started to ignore, I still believed in family. I still believed that the grief we shared meant something real. That when someone loses everything, the people who are left behind cling to each other, not to hurt each other, but to survive. I had no idea that letting her stay would become the worst mistake of my life. Before I continue, I want to ask all of you to please give a like to this video and subscribe to my channel, The Silent Stories, for more stories like mine. Your support means the world to me. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop a comment telling me which country you're tuning in from. It's incredible to see how far this community of wonderful people has grown, and I'm so grateful to be able to share my story with you. The first few weeks after my injury, Lila was attentive. She drove me to appointments, picked up my prescriptions, told the nurses at the clinic that I was her second mom, which surprised me, but I let it pass. Grief does strange things, I told myself. Again, At night, she'd knock gently on my door and ask how I was feeling. She even set reminders on her phone to make sure I took my pills on time. "You need to rest, Eleanor," she'd say. "You took care of David for his whole life. Let someone take care of you now." It felt sincere, and I wanted to believe her. The surgery date was set for early May. The hospital warned me I'd need at least 6 to 8 weeks of support afterwards, someone to help with meals, dressing, moving around. My spine would be fragile, and bending or lifting anything could undo the work they were about to do. They offered to arrange a temporary home nurse, but Lila insisted she could manage it all. "It's what family does," she said. The words made me want to cry, not because of the promise they held, but because I needed them so badly. I needed to believe I wasn't alone in this world, that even after all the loss, after burying my son, after giving up my independence, there was someone left who still saw me as worth caring for. Lila had already started taking more responsibility around the house. She handled the groceries, cooked on most nights, and paid for a cleaning service to come in once a week. I hadn't asked for any of that, but she waved off my concern, saying she was just getting things in order before the recovery. I even offered her money a few times, but she declined. "Don't worry about it," she said. "I've got some savings. Just focus on getting better." I didn't realize then that I'd handed her more than just household responsibilities. I was slowly handing her control of the routines, the finances, even the atmosphere in my home. And when you're in pain, when you're afraid, you don't always notice what you're giving up until it's too late. The week before the surgery, she brought in a sleek black folder with all the paperwork the hospital had sent us. "I went ahead and filled most of it out," she said, smiling as she handed me a pen. "You just need to sign and initial here, and here, and here." I was groggy that day. I hadn't slept well in weeks, and the painkillers dulled more than just my nerves. Still, I trusted her, so I signed. The insurance documents, the consent forms, the follow-up care agreements, all of it. She tucked it away neatly, kissed the top of my head, and said, "You're going to do great." The morning of the surgery, Lila drove me to the hospital, holding my hand tightly the whole way. "We're a team," she said softly as the nurse wheeled me toward pre-op. "I'll be right here when you wake up." And she was, at least at first. When I opened my eyes in recovery, I saw her blurry silhouette by the window. She looked tired, but she smiled. "You did it," she whispered. "Everything went smoothly." I wanted to say thank you, but my throat was too dry to speak. The first few days post-op were a blur. Pain, nurses adjusting my bed, IV drips beeping quietly in the background. I remember Lila bringing me my favorite lavender lotion. She helped me sit up, brushed my hair back gently, and told the nurses she'd take it from there. For a while it really did feel like I wasn't alone. It felt like I had someone. But slowly, as the days passed and I returned home, things began to shift. Lila was less present. She started coming home late, said she was handling errands, or running to the pharmacy. But sometimes she came back without bags, without explanations. When I asked her if we could sit and talk, she always seemed rushed. "Not now, Eleanor. I'm exhausted," she'd mutter, already disappearing down the hallway. Meals became more inconsistent. Leftovers, takeout containers left on the counter. She stopped asking about my pain levels. The reminders stopped. The gentle knocks on my door became absent silence. Still, I held on to hope. Maybe she was tired. Maybe taking care of me was harder than she expected. Maybe grief was finally catching up with her. I didn't want to believe anything worse. I couldn't. Because the alternative, that I had opened my home and my heart to someone who saw me as a burden, not a blessing, was too painful to face. Not yet. Clarity. The recliner squeaked every time I moved, which wasn't often. It became my little island, old, faded, half-sunk, and uncomfortable. I spent nearly 16 hours a day in that chair, surrounded by silence. My body ached in slow waves. I timed my pain pills to give me just enough relief to walk to the bathroom, or reheat leftovers without crying out. And every time I sat back down, I'd wince and wonder how much longer I'd be healing this slowly. Layla wasn't cruel. Not in the overt way people sometimes imagine. She didn't yell or slam doors. She didn't mock or curse. But what she did do was worse, in some ways. She vanished. Some days I wouldn't see her at all. I'd hear the garage door go up early and then hours would pass. Sometimes she came home late at night, whispering into her phone, heels clicking down the hallway. Other days she'd breeze in around lunchtime, toss her keys on the counter and say, "Did you eat?" without waiting for an answer. I kept a little notepad next to the recliner and started writing down the days I was alone. The days no one asked how I felt. The days the fridge was nearly empty. It wasn't for pity, it was just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. Because isolation can do that, make you second guess your memory, your worth. By week 5, I realized I had become invisible in my own house. The final straw came on a Sunday afternoon. I'd been trying to refill my prescription, the stronger of the two painkillers. It wasn't covered by Medicare anymore, and I hadn't driven since the surgery. I asked Layla if she could pick it up. She looked up from her laptop and said, "That pharmacy's out of my way. Can't you ask a neighbor? I don't know who even lives here anymore." I said. She shrugged. "You're not helpless. Call a cab." I didn't have the energy to explain that I had already tried, twice, that the wait time for a local cab was over 2 hours, that I could barely sit upright for 20 minutes. Instead, I nodded and whispered, "Okay." That night, when the pain surged up and settled in my ribs like a burning coal, I cried. But not from the ache in my body. The ache in my body had become familiar. It was the ache in my chest, the realization that Layla didn't see me as someone worth caring for anymore, that hurt the most. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, thinking about all the little moments that had led here. The signature on the forms, the promises whispered in hospital rooms, the way she used to gently pat my hand and say, "I've got you." What had changed? Or maybe the better question was, what had always been true that I refused to see? Layla hadn't moved in because she needed comfort. She moved in because she needed security. I was a place to land, a name on a deed, a source of sympathy she could soak in and use for her own narrative. It hit me then clearer than any moment since the surgery. I was never her family. I was her project. And now that the project had served its purpose, she had moved on to newer, shinier things. A Hawaiian spa trip for her mother, a new car I'd seen in the driveway, designer bags that appeared and disappeared like magic. I had been the bridge she used to cross into a better life. And now that she was on the other side, she didn't need to look back. But what she didn't know, what she had perhaps forgotten, was that before I was a grieving mother, before I was a lonely retiree, I was a school principal, a woman who ran an entire building of chaos and discipline and stubborn teenagers for nearly 4 decades. I knew how to read between lines. I knew how to ask quiet questions. I knew how to find the truth, buried under excuses, misdirection, and silence. And I was starting to wonder, really wonder, what exactly I had signed, what promises had been made in my name, what payments had been issued, and more importantly, where had they gone? I shifted in the recliner, biting back a groan. My hand reached for the notepad. I scribbled a single word on the paper. Audit. I didn't know exactly what I'd find, but I knew how to look, knew how to keep quiet, knew how to wait. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I felt awake. It was a Tuesday, late spring. The sun was coming through the living room windows in streaks of yellow, and the air outside carried that early warmth that reminds you summer's around the corner. I had just managed to shuffle into the kitchen, balancing on my cane, to warm a bowl of oatmeal. I was proud of myself. It had taken nearly 30 minutes, but I did it. I sat down slowly, careful with my back, and just as I took my first bite, Lila walked in. She was humming a bright tune, one I didn't recognize. She placed her phone on the counter and pulled out a thick envelope. "Guess what?" she said, already grinning. "I have a surprise." I looked up, spoon paused in midair. "For who?" "For my mom," she said. 10 days, oceanfront, full resort package, spa, yoga, guided nature walks. They even have morning sound baths. It's all inclusive. Flights, too. I blinked. "Oh, she's been under so much stress lately," Lila went on. "She deserves this. She was the one holding me together through everything. David, your surgery, my work deadlines." She trailed off, watching me for a reaction I didn't have words for. I nodded once. "That's very generous." She smiled, satisfied, and turned to make herself coffee like she'd just shared news of a charity donation. I sat in silence, the oatmeal now thickening in the bowl. I didn't ask why I hadn't been offered anything. I didn't ask why the woman who hadn't visited me once, hadn't sent a single card or called after my surgery, was suddenly being treated like the backbone of the family. I didn't ask because I knew the answer. Lila's version of the story, the one she told others and maybe even herself, didn't include me anymore. I had played my part, provided a home, signed where she asked, kept quiet when she needed space. That chapter was over. I was an extra now. A side note, a body in a chair, but that day I couldn't stay silent. I reached out gently, voice calm, almost rehearsed. Lila, I've been meaning to ask. The pain's been getting worse lately. The doctor said I need a proper medical recliner. This one's doing more harm than good. Would you be able to help with the cost? She turned around, cup of coffee in hand. Her face changed, just slightly. The corners of her smile dipped, the warmth thinned. Oh, she said. Eleanor, I just paid for this trip. It wiped out my cushion. But, she cut me off. You have a roof, a working fridge, a TV. You have air conditioning. She gestured vaguely toward the window unit humming in the background. Some people don't even have that. You're lucky. I stared at her. It wasn't the words themselves that hurt. It was the ease with which she said them. The finality in her voice, like this was all she owed me. Be grateful for the air conditioning. That phrase lodged somewhere deep in my chest. I couldn't respond. Not in that moment. My body stayed frozen. Spoon still resting in the bowl, my legs aching, the chair digging into my side. She tapped her nails on the counter. Anyway, I've got to drop the booking forms off at the agency. Can you take something for the pain? I nodded, not trusting my voice. She left 5 minutes later, a light kiss on the cheek, a chirpy, love you, like none of it had just happened. I sat there, oatmeal cold, the hum of the air conditioner suddenly sounding like a joke, like an insult. I looked around the room, suddenly seeing it differently. The peeling paint, the sagging recliner, the dent in the floor where I'd once fallen. That evening I made my way, slowly, to the filing cabinet in my office. I pulled out the thick folder from the hospital, the one I hadn't touched since I came home. I began flipping through every page. Treatment authorizations, insurance benefit summaries, consent forms, and then I saw it, tucked into the back, a breakdown of benefits. A line I hadn't noticed before, living donor recovery support stipend, $35,000, covered under my name, for post-operative assistance, equipment caregiver support, medical transport. I blinked, I read it again, $35,000, assigned for my care, my recovery, my well-being. And then, something colder than pain crept in, because I remembered the folder Lila had filled out, the one she'd asked me to sign, the one she'd submitted for me, and I knew without any doubt that money never made it to me, but someone had it, and someone had just booked a luxury vacation to a spa that wasn't for me. I didn't sleep that night. The numbers ran through my mind like a clock I couldn't shut off. $35,000. That's what the insurance had set aside, not for Lila, not for spa vacations or designer handbags, but for me, to help me recover from the surgery, to help me sit without pain, to help me heal. I remembered the exact phrase on the document, living donor recovery support, intended for the comfort and care of the donor throughout the post-operative period. I read it 5 times, just to be sure. I had spent my whole career reading between the lines. When you're a school principal, you learn how to decode a child's silence, how to spot the hidden meanings in a parent's everything's fine. You learn what isn't being said. And in this case, what wasn't being said was written in ink. The check hadn't come to me. I hadn't been told about it. I hadn't signed anything saying it should go to someone else. But someone had signed for it. I took out a notebook and began writing things down. Dates, details, names. May 14th, surgery. May 18th, discharge. May 21st, Lila drops off a thick envelope to the post office. June 2nd, Lila books her mother's spa retreat. I flipped through the hospital packet again. Near the back, under claims correspondence, I found a copy of a reimbursement notice. It confirmed that the $35,000 check had been processed and sent out 2 weeks after my surgery, issued directly to the designated representative of the insured. And there it was, in black and white. Payee, Lila Hart Purpose, donor recovery support, Eleanor Price. I stared at the page, my mouth dry. There was even a copy of the back of the check, and right there, in her handwriting, was her signature. Neat, confident, like nothing was wrong. She had taken the money. She had known exactly what it was for, and she had looked me in the eye and told me to be grateful for air conditioning. My hands started to tremble, but not from fear. It was something else now. Something steady, something cold. I closed the file and sat back in the chair. The one that hurt me every time I used it. The one she didn't think I deserved to replace. I looked around the room, no longer with sadness, but with precision. Detail. This was no longer personal. This was procedural. I had handled worse. In my years at the school, I'd dealt with teachers who forged time cards, parents who lied about addresses to get their kids into better districts, vendors who billed us twice for equipment we never received. I had learned to follow the trail, quietly, completely, and this was no different. That night, I pulled out my old laptop and logged into the insurance portal. My profile was still active from all the pre-surgery paperwork. I navigated to the benefits and claims section and found what I needed. Copies of everything, policy outlines, issued reimbursement, contact points for the fraud department. At the very bottom of the page, in fine print, was a small line that made me feel almost weightless. If you suspect misuse of donor-specific benefits, contact our Special Investigations Unit directly. It even listed a number. I copied it down and slipped it into my Bible. Not because I was going to call it right away. I wasn't there yet, but because I knew I would. Soon, I spent the next 2 days gathering every document I could find. Insurance mail, medical receipts, even the emails Lila had forwarded to me while pretending to handle the paperwork. I kept everything in a manila folder labeled vacation, a little private joke that kept me steady. Lila didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care. She was too busy preparing for the spa trip. Every day I heard her on the phone, confirming flights, bragging to someone about the generous wellness money they'd gotten. She never said my name, not once. It was like I didn't exist anymore. But I was there, listening, watching, waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel weak. I didn't feel invisible. I felt like myself again. The woman who once ran a whole building full of chaos and made it look easy. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was a correction, an audit, and soon someone would be answering for it. I made the call on a Wednesday morning. The house was quiet. Leela had left early, probably off buying another silk robe or treating herself to an overpriced smoothie. I brewed my tea slowly, steadied my hand, and dialed the number tucked inside my Bible. Special Investigations Unit, a calm male voice answered. "This is Marcus. How can I assist you today?" I told him my name, my policy number. And then I said a single sentence, carefully rehearsed. "I believe there's been a misappropriation of donor recovery funds in my name, and I have the documentation to prove it." The line went very quiet. "Then, ma'am, I'm going to transfer you to a senior case handler. Please hold." They didn't ask me to repeat myself. That was how I knew they were listening. 5 minutes later, I was speaking to a woman named Valerie Shaw. Her voice was firm, professional, but not cold. She asked for basic details. Dates, names, how I'd come into possession of the evidence. I answered clearly. No emotion, no blame, just facts. "I have the check copy," I said. "I have the benefit explanation. I also have the vacation booking confirmation and her signature on the reimbursement form." "Has the recipient acknowledged these funds to you directly?" she asked. "No," I said. "She told me she couldn't help with my medical equipment because she was broke. Then she booked her mother a 10-day spa vacation." I heard her pen pause on the other end. "Understood," she said. Valerie explained that the investigation would begin immediately. Their protocol was straightforward: verify the payment, review usage, identify potential fraud, and notify any impacted parties, including employers. "We take misuse of donor-related benefits extremely seriously," she said. "This isn't just unethical. It may be a breach of federal insurance fraud laws." I asked her what would happen next. She paused, then said something I won't forget. "If your documentation is accurate, Mrs. Price, this will not end quietly for them." I thanked her and hung up. I didn't tell Leela. Not that day. Not ever. Instead, I watched. Over the next week, things stayed oddly calm. Leela smiled more, humming to herself as she packed a suitcase in the guest room. She brought home an expensive new luggage set, gifted from a friend she claimed. I didn't ask. She showed me a glossy brochure for the retreat, ocean views, meditation decks, Himalayan salt scrubs. She handed it to me like a child showing off a report card. Isn't it stunning? I looked at the cover. A woman lay in a white robe, eyes closed, wrapped in sunlight and serenity. Very, I said. I hope your mother loves it. She grinned. She deserves it. I nodded. 2 days later, while Leela was out, a thick envelope arrived in our mailbox. It was addressed to her, but not from anyone I recognized. I knew the logo, though. It belonged to the insurance company. When she got home and opened it, I was sitting in the living room. She stood frozen for a full minute, just staring at the pages. Her lips moved slightly as she read. "What's that?" I asked, sipping my tea. "Just policy stuff," she mumbled, folding the letter and backing out of the room. That night, she didn't come home. The next day, a second letter arrived. This one wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to Leela's employer, a local government agency, where she worked in administration. She must have used sick leave or vacation time for the trip. I watched her pace the kitchen later that day, phone clutched tightly to her chest. She looked like someone who just heard a distant siren and realized it was coming closer. The third letter came by certified mail. That one required her signature. After she signed, I saw her retreat to her room and slam the door. I didn't ask what was in it. I already knew. What followed was exactly what Valerie had described. First, a temporary suspension of benefits, then a formal audit request from the insurer's legal department. The fraud team had traced the check, the dates of withdrawal, and the exact expenses that followed. Spa bookings, retail purchases, a car down payment, not a dollar toward a medical recliner, not a cent toward in-home support. They hadn't just misused the funds, they had stolen from a benefit designed to help a recovering patient survive in comfort. I watched as her world began to wobble. The phone calls became louder, more frantic. I overheard words like lawyer, termination, and criminal liability. She never once came to me, never apologized, never asked if I had reported her. But I saw it in her eyes. She knew. She knew exactly who had made the call, who had turned the key, and I sat in the very same recliner she told me to be grateful for. The hum of the air conditioner behind me, watching her face collapse like a house built on sand. This wasn't revenge. It was the return of balance. She had treated my silence as weakness. She was wrong. It didn't all unravel at once. That's not how life works. Sometimes it's one thread at a time, a small tug here, a bit of unraveling there, and then one morning the whole thing just falls apart. For Lila, that moment came 6 weeks after the first letter arrived. By then, she had stopped pretending. The brightness was gone. The perfume, the fresh flowers in the hallway, the breezy hums in the kitchen, all gone. She stayed in her room most days, blinds drawn, laptop open, but rarely touched. I kept my distance. We hadn't spoken much since the audit began. Not in any real way. The house had grown quiet again, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. This was the silence of a storm that had already passed and left everything wrecked. Then one morning, a knock came at the door. It wasn't the police. It didn't need to be. It was a courier. Legal documents. A formal settlement notice from the insurance company's legal team. Lila signed for it without a word and disappeared back inside. That evening, I overheard her on the phone in the hallway. "Yes, we'll pay it back. All of it. We can't afford a lawyer like that. Please, there has to be a payment plan." The call ended in a whimper, a quiet little sound that might have once been tears. And still, not a word to me. No apology, no admission, just the slow, grinding sound of consequences doing their work. I later learned from Valerie that the settlement included full repayment of the $35,000 with interest and penalties. The spa had refused a refund, so the money was gone. Her government job, which required ethics compliance, put her on indefinite unpaid leave. And once the employer's legal team reviewed the situation, she was formally let go. They called it a violation of public trust. She called it unfair. I didn't call it anything. She left a month later, packed her things while I was at physical therapy, left a note on the table, one line, scrawled hastily in ink. "I know what you did. I hope it was worth it." I folded the note carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my reading glasses. it was worth it. Every page I copied, every hour I spent combing through the documents, every ounce of strength it took, not to yell, not to cry, not to give her the power of knowing I was broken. It was worth it. I never saw her again. Not in person, but I heard through someone at church that she'd moved back in with her mother. No job, no savings, her car repossessed, credit in shambles. What had started as a wellness retreat ended in complete unraveling. And me, well, I'm still here, but not in the old recliner. A few weeks after Lila left, I got a call from Valerie at the insurance company. "We closed the investigation, Mrs. Price," she said warmly. "You've been incredibly helpful and honestly, incredibly strong through all of this." I didn't say much, just thanked her, but then she said something that caught me off guard. "Our board was moved, deeply, by your case." She explained that my situation had prompted a policy review, one that would make it harder for anyone in the future to intercept a donor's care benefits. But more than that, the board had voted unanimously to approve a discretionary grant, a gesture of respect and restitution. "We'd like to offer you a full medical recovery package," she said. "A new electric recliner, in-home support for 6 months, physical therapy stipends, if you're open to it, a paid weekend retreat." I was stunned. She laughed softly on the line. "We thought maybe you'd like a proper vacation, one for you. No lies, no stolen funds, just rest. Somewhere warm." I accepted. A month later, I sat in a quiet suite overlooking a garden and the ocean beyond. Not Hawaii. I didn't want that. Too many associations. Instead, I chose a small inn near the coast in Maine. Simple, quiet, honest. I brought my best friend Ruth. We spent the days eating fresh chowder, walking on soft trails, reading by the window. I even dipped my feet in the water. Cold as it was, I laughed. On our last night, I sat by the fireplace in the main lounge. The chair beneath me was soft, sturdy, supportive. I looked out at the firelight flickering across the glass windows and thought about David. I had given everything for love, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. That had never changed. What changed was what I learned. Love isn't a debt owed. It's a gift. And when people abuse that gift, the answer isn't to keep bleeding for them. The answer is knowing when to stop, and how to rise. Not with fire, but with truth, and maybe a better chair.